everybody. I'm back to talk about the June 17th and 18th discussion posts. So first thing, I just want to make sure everybody's citing with the author's last name, not the publication title or the title of the text. The reason is because when you write the bibliography down at the bottom of whatever you're writing, the bibliography is arranged by author's last name alphabetically. And so by citing with the author's last name, that enables your reader to very quickly go down and index that text through the author's last name in the bibliography. So just good practice for future reference. This phrase, mass production facilities, also birthed new needs for consumers that they hadn't known they needed, needs we didn't know we needed. So this ties in to one of the principles of technology. Invention is the mother of necessity, sort of flipping on its head the phrase necessity is the mother of invention. So if both of these things become true, then you end up with a sort of feedback loop, a sort of co-production, there's that key word again, of needs and technologies to satisfy those needs. So we have needs, if you want to think of this in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we have these these core biological needs for water, for food, for shelter, and then higher levels of needs for a sense of psychological security, for happiness, for joy, for fulfillment, whatever. And so you have these needs driving invention, and necessity is the mother of invention. And then conversely, you have inventions driving needs. You have the fact that something becomes possible to create. Maybe it's not satisfying a need directly. It's more satisfying a desire. So you have the manufacture of desire that feeds back in to the creation of more technological goods. And so then you have this sort of co-production between desire, a need on the one hand, and technology on the other hand. Ford's phrase "no fitters" as a definition, as a sort of heuristic shorthand for what mass production means, means that the responsibility for quality passes from who would have been the fitters, manual laborers, to designers and engineers, placing more emphasis on those more highly professionalized, highly specialized kinds of labor, engineering and design. And so you're sort of taking power away from people who had been manually, physically involved with the production of goods, and transferring that responsibility for quality and therefore that power to designers and engineers. And that's something I kind of want you to think about as we experience our own technological transition, is how does the way that the technology changes labor change the power dynamics of the laborer? If different kinds of responsibility are being reallocated in different kinds of ways, because technology is taking responsibility away from some people and giving it to other people, how does that change the status of those people within our society? We have this sort of this compounding series of layers of routinization, of making things routine, of standardized, homogeneous, the routinization of raw materials, the routinization of parts, the routinization of processes, the routinization of workers, including the routinization of their bodies. This all ties into something called Taylorism. After Frederick Winslow Taylor, he was one of the theorizers, along with Henry Ford, of mass production of what is now known as the scientific management of workflows, and what is formerly taught in the university as industrial engineering, the scientization of workflows, mostly in the name of efficiency. But there's a sort of phrase of slow is smooth, smooth is fast, and so there's part of and smoothness is achieved through homogeneity, uniformity, routinization. Let's make everything the same and everything fit together seamlessly. And to that end, there was a bottleneck in Ford's vertical integration of his workflow. His cars depended on a supply of rubber for the tires. And before we invented synthetic rubbers that we could derive from petroleum byproducts, rubber was, and to an extent still is, a natural product of latex trees. It's harvested from plantations of trees that produce latex as a sort of sap. And so Ford had very little control over this aspect of his workflow. It wasn't routinized. And he was completely dependent on mostly Dutch colonial interests who controlled the kinds of places where latex trees grow. And so Ford wanted to set up a model colony in the Amazonian rainforest that he called Fordlandia. It was a purpose-built city from scratch, which became a kind of plantation, a kind of industrial plantation, and it became in its construction very similar to a slave plantation. The people there, Ford designed and controlled the entire town. And it was a notable failure. So I encourage you to look up Fordlandia, Amazonia, Brazil. What else? Yeah, so the rise of credit and what this means for affordability. So a big part of the Model T and of Ford's process and mass production is to make things affordable. Is not just to make many of them, but to make many of them so you can make them affordable, so people can buy more of them, so you can increase your economy of scale, and so you can make more of them, and so on and so forth. And part of that is not just a technological innovation, but a financial innovation, an innovation of the technological vehicles of credit, making money more accessible as well, not just making stuff more accessible. Okay, that's everything for June 17th. For June 18th, for the discussion, a lot of you, because of I think our experiences working remotely, including through this class, sort of latched on to the idea of the devaluation of place through the lens of remote work, and that being present physically, so the physical manifestation of place sort of mattering less through the possibility of remote work that's become ever more possible in recent years. And I just want to emphasize all different kinds of the devaluation of place. The devaluation of place through environmental destruction, for example, but also the collapse of space. How did Hayek put it? The annihilation of space through instantaneous telecommunications, through ever increasingly quick modes of physical transportation, through rail and air travel, and so on and so forth. One more thing I wanted to talk about was the convergence of Taco Bell and McDonald's architecture in terms of the collapse of space. Architecture used to be a regional phenomenon because architecture was highly linked to your physical environment. Architecture had to be responsive to the environment, not just on aesthetic grounds, but on very material grounds. Architectural materials are very dense and very expensive, therefore, to transport: stone and sand and so forth, bricks, timber. And so architecture had to be responsive to the raw materials that were accessible to the site of architecture. Not only that, architecture had to be responsive to the climatic environment, the meteorological environment. If you have a really hot environment, then your architecture needs to be responsive to that. And you need to put things like adobe and high thermal mass materials, or white roofs, that kind of thing. If you have a wet environment, you need a type of architecture that's responsive to that wetness. But with the annihilation of space, architecture became less dependent upon the locality of its material supply. It also became less dependent upon the environment, the climatic and meteorological environment, because we created things like we artificialized the environment through air conditioning, through sealed windows, through double pane windows. And so with artificial heating, artificial air conditioning, architecture had to be less responsive to the environment. And so you can end up with an architectural homogenization, especially where there's a financial incentive to do so. And so there's this interesting YouTube video by the YouTuber Stuart Hicks, who's an architect. And it talks about the homogenization of fast food architecture. And you have a situation where in the 80s and even into the early 90s, fast food had all of these regional forms of architecture that reflected not only where the fast food restaurants originated from and the architectural styles of those places, but in the case of sort of ethnically coded fast food cuisine like Taco Bell, the architecture is sort of aesthetically responding to the architectural aesthetics of the kind of place that it's borrowing the cuisine from. In the case of Taco Bell, obviously Mexico or southern Texas. And so, you have this homogenization of fast food architecture where all fast food architecture comes to be as fast food becomes massified. and enfranchised, then you have this homogenization of fast food architecture, and you get to a point in the early 2010s where all fast food chains are basically building off identical architectural models using the same materials, the same sort of minimalistic modernist styles. And so that's really interesting. I'll link to that below. All right, I'm still grading. Everything's great. I'm enjoying reading what you have to say, and keep up the good work.